Welcome back to The Watch, and like Season 1, I'll be running solo for the House of the Dragon Season 2 reviews, and I am pleased to say that right out of the gate, the show doesn't miss a beat. We are what appears to be so far, it's only the first episode in, but the first episode is on par with the quality of Season 1 of House of the Dragon. There are some things to really appreciate about this episode, as well as some things that, cause a reaction. One in particular. As usual with my reviews, I'll be talking non-spoiler and then going into more of a focused, bit-by-bit chronological kind of thought process and review of the episode. And so broad views over the episode, I give it a high mark, 7 or 8 out of 10 actually. Like I said, doesn't skip a beat, picks off right after where the last episode of Season 1 ended, and things play out as you expect. The characters all very consistent. The logic, this is one of the things that I appreciated about this episode. The logic that is underpinning the events is so consistent, and that was one of the strengths of just House of the Dragon Season 1 in full, is that how many of the events, nearly all of them, were happening for justified reasons. It's a sign of good writing. And what's interesting about this episode, a lot of it is logistics about what areas do we need to protect? How can we move forward? How can we gain allies while at the same time dealing with the fallout and events of the last episode of Season 1? It was done very satisfyingly, where you see, okay, they're doing this. That makes sense. It's consistent with not only the characters, but oftentimes in line with their interests. And even when the characters do something that might be out of, their benefit, it's in line with the characters. Like how the Queen, responds to what happened at the end of Season 1. Now, I am assuming that most people who are watching this have seen Season 1. I'll try and avoid the major spoiler of the last episode of Season 1 until the spoiler section here in the review, but if you have seen it, you know what happens. And the Queen responds in a completely consistent way, and then because the fallout of those events are going to be so drastic, the choices that you see the characters discussing and even, battling with are really engaging. It's interesting how good dialogue can just draw you into a well-written show. What's also impressive on a writing level in regards to Episode 1, multiple things happen in several of the scenes where you learn a lot about the characters as they are talking about other things. And so, it's one of those refreshing things, and it's what I enjoyed about Season 1, is it's refreshing to have good writing in a show where there's not only good dialogue, but good character work, and a very engaging plot, sometimes even a gut-wrenching plot with certain things that happen, and something serious happens in this episode, which was, that was a kick in the guts. It was a kick in the guts. I appreciate that they, of course, I don't know how they could possibly show what happened in a more graphic sense, and I'm glad that they didn't, but it's like Game of Thrones, known for being fairly graphic. I actually appreciate that in certain scenes they moved away from being so explicit. I actually feel Game of Thrones, because I know, yes, this is House of the Dragon, not Game of Thrones, but Game of Thrones crossed certain lines in terms of how graphic it was willing to be, both in violence and also in sexualized nudity. In House of the Dragon, they toned that down. In Episode 1 of Season 2, there was actually a couple of times where, if they had the original Game of Thrones mentality, I suspect they would have exploited certain things in terms of how much nudity they're willing to show and stuff like that. And it was toned down, though still, graphic in making clear what is going on. It was not showing actual nudity. And so I think that's actually a step in the right direction, because I don't think the show needs it. The quality of the show, the quality of the writing, the stuff that's going on, it doesn't need that really cheap fan service. And this is what I commented on in Season 1 of House of the Dragon as well, when comparing how they handle that compared to just the blatant kind of exploitative use of sex and nudity in Game of Thrones, where many scenes were just pointless, and they literally coined a term for it, where it was needless stuff thrown in, and they called it sexposition. Okay, they knew it was needless, and to me that did a disservice to the show. And in House of the Dragon, they turned it down, and then in this episode, seems like they even turn it down again, because it feels like they're having a bit more confidence in the quality of writing and only using those elements like, sex and even violence to when it assists the story. And even though I don't like all that nudity and stuff, I will acknowledge that they handled it much better in season 1 in terms of it appearing when it was more complementing the story, not fully but more complementing. But this episode, it felt like focused. Season 2 episode 1 focused more on the story. And of course, I don't think anyone would want to have seen the main violent thing that happens in this episode in a graphic sense. But it was still a kick in the guts. It was rough. And so that definitely has an emotional reaction. And of course is going to spell some very serious things. We're in a state of escalation with this episode. And yeah, they mostly sell it. There are some questions I have. I'll go into the spoilers as to things that might not have really fit together. That's why I can't give this like a 9 out of 10, and it didn't blow me away so much to even approach like a 10 out of 10. That's why I'm sitting on an 8, but the more I analyze it, it could go down to a 7, so I'm kind of, falling between the 7 and 8 out of 10 range. Still, very high marks, very well done. And I gotta say, this is one of my own types of appreciations, which not everyone will get out of it, but I really appreciate just the medieval world that House of the Dragons is showing. Was so much better than Game of Thrones. But that's what Game of Thrones should have looked like. House of the Dragons is what Game of Thrones should have looked like. Where Game of Thrones, they did some weird things with the costumes and the sets and things, where it was more fantasy than the medieval culture this setting was founded on. And George Martin has mentioned what, King's Landing should have actually looked like medieval France kind of thing. And it didn't really look like Game of Thrones, but they're keeping that visual look for King's Landing. But other things where they are able to change, they're made to look far more medieval, and that's consistent, like especially with the weapons, the set decorations, the livery, types of the armor, not all types of the armor. And one of the things that was just another sign of that kind of nod to more medieval authenticity is actually the new intro to the series. It has a different intro to season 1, and it's a tapestry being woven, but the style of tapestry is a medieval style tapestry. There are elements that look even a bit like the Bayeux tapestry. And it's just one of those things, like, I appreciate that. And it does depict a really immersive medieval world, and I enjoy it all the more for it. So those are my broad overviews. I definitely recommend episode 1. It doesn't falter. It looks like the same people, the good people who are working on season 1 and working on season 2. It is engaging. There is a gut punch at the end that they don't go too graphic, which I again appreciate. So overall, I'm on board. I'm looking forward to the rest of it. I hope it maintains this quality. Let's go into some of the more specifics in the spoiler section now. You have been warned. We're going into spoilers. And the episode opens up with showing Winterfell. And I was mentioning how they have changed some things to be a bit more authentic. I was pondering as I was watching through season 1, because I rewatched season 1 in preparation for going through season 2. And they hadn't shown Winterfell in season 1. And House of the Dragon, I feel, is actually, at the moment, like, it's as good as the writing of season 1 of Game of Thrones, which is very high praise, might I add, but then Game of Thrones fell off a cliff towards the end. And there's always been speculation that they might be remaking Game of Thrones after they do House of the Dragon, some of these other prequels if they're successful, to give it the ending that the Game of Thrones story deserves. Well, if they were going to consider being willing to remake Game of Thrones, I was partially kind of wanting them to remake Winterfell, because I don't like the design of Winterfell, and it's not accurate to the books. In fact, I've designed a new Winterfell on Shadiversity that is far more accurate to the book description of Winterfell, and I much prefer that, and I've sent it out for free for anyone to use and gain inspiration from, and I would have loved it if they used that, but they showed the same Winterfell from the Game of Thrones series, and I understand why, because they do want to keep the connection with the Game of Thrones series, that if people like House of the Dragons, they might go and watch Game of Thrones, even though I think House of the Dragons is, as, like at the moment, superior to the totality of Game of Thrones, because the totality of the writing so far in House of the Dragons is superior to the totality of writing Game of Thrones, if we could say equivalent to the writing quality of Season 1. But yes, we see classic Winterfell, and it's the Game of Thrones Winterfell. We see one of the Lord Stark, he's wearing, is it ice? The big sword. I like seeing that big sword again. It got melted down in the Game of Thrones thing into two swords. But it's when Jace, I think Luke is the one who, we're in spoilers, so, got chomped, he's dead. And he is talking to the Lord of Winterfell, trying to get him to join the side. And there's some good dialogue, about the history of the Starks and stuff. Some of it is relevant to what's actually happening, but it's a lead up because then a raven appears, and that's going to be the message of what happened. But it's kind of a nod to, hey, you remember Winterfell, it's there. All right, so then we see Daemon returning to Dragonstone, and we get the context of what has been happening with the Queen. Her son has just been killed, and Daemon is not happy with the fact that she has left. She's gone incommunicado and actually looking for proof of her son's death. And there was just a good line. And this is just a sign of the quality of writing, when you have good lines like this that have depth to it, where Daemon is speaking with Rhaenys and demanding Rhaenys go out with him to, I think it was to attack something. I forget exactly what it was to attack, but he wanted to kill Vhagar. If both of them teamed up, he reckoned he could take out Vhagar and get revenge and get a son for a son. And Rhaenys is saying she's too tired, can't do it, and things are vulnerable, the Queen's away, stuff like that. And Daemon says the mother grieves while the Queen shirks her duties, because Daemon is pointing out that the Queen has two large roles. Yes, she is a mother, and he understands that a mother grieves, but while the mother grieves, that side of the Queen is shirking her duties, and he feels things need to get done. But of course, you can understand completely why she's grieving, what she's doing, what she's doing. In fact, I have to say, the way they handled the grief of the mother and the brother, especially when the brother returns, everything, that felt sincere. That had weight to it. They handled the grief of Luke, I think it's Luke that died, really well for the characters that would have grieved it most. Daemon handles his grief in his own way, and you actually saw at the end of the last episode of Season 1, Daemon kind of grieving his way, where he actually kind of just walks outside on his own, he bows his head and stuff, and that's his grieving moment, and then he's a man of action and is back to work. And is overly critical of people who are grieving more than him. He kind of probably feels that he has grieved the right amount. But the fact that they show multiple characters reacting in different ways that are in line with their characters is a reflection of the quality of writing in this episode. The episode progresses, and they talk about some of the strategies of what's happening, and they mention the blockade. And this is why I mentioned in the non-spoiler section that so many things that are happening in this episode is underpinned by good logic, and the blockade is actually a refreshingly logical move in their situation. And I say refreshingly because so many movies, TV shows, when they're talking about the tactics of their war or engagement or conflict, it's just nonsense. The reasons that they have for underpinning either the conflict or the battle or why they're doing what they're doing is utter nonsense. And so much, like I think of Rings of Power and stuff like that, they try and justify why things are happening. I just end up reacting in it's the most stupid stuff ever. The most recent point of comparison is The Acolyte, currently out. House of the Dragon, they actually have logical stuff. They're reacting logically. And so They didn't re-show it in this episode. It might have been good for a refresher for people who have a larger gap between season 1. Because in season 1, they mentioned how they were going to blockade. And they actually show the map. It's the table in Dragonstone, which is made in a map of Westeros. And this was actually the key point that I needed as a viewer to understand how effective the blockade was, because one of the characters rests their hand above the map, showing where Dragonstone is. And then they kind of guide it down to where King's Landing is. And so Dragonstone is like on this island, and there is this inlet in Westeros that leads to King's Landing. And this inlet is a portion of sea, like a strait, that they get most of their supply from. They could get supply from on land, but supplying from on boat is much faster and in larger quantities. And if you know anything about the logistics of how goods were transported historically, water is always much larger, much higher quantities. And in like medieval England, a lot of trade was by riverboats. And so this is just like, it's just good, it's logical stuff that is making the world more immersive. But they show that in season 1, right, how if they blockade this kind of strait, this passage of sea towards King's Landing, they can cut off the larger portion of the supplies. Not everything. And they show that in this episode where they say because of the blockade, things are strained, but not completely gone. They're still able to get like food to feed the sheep. They have a higher tax on the farmers and stuff like that. More logical stuff, and it's only 10% tax, so they're not getting everything. So they're addressing logistics, and it's woven in such a way that it's not just like this stale, here is the battle plans. It's woven at the same time of characterization and how these characters reacting, growing in relationships, and establishing new things. And a good example is the scene where is it Aegon, the king? There's so many Aegons, so I get them confused. But now I think it's Aegon, the king. He is in council, and he wants to bring his son. The son is going to be heir. And there are multiple things actually happening in this scene. And this is a great example of quality of writing right here, where a scene is doing more than one thing, more than just setting out the logistics of the conflict, which is still important, but it is establishing the dynamics between the characters, changes in characters, how they're growing into their roles, and other things. And so Aegon is showing some new characteristics due to him being in the position of king. He's liking it. And there are some odd things that I appreciate about it that I didn't necessarily expect, because he was this selfish idiot, and he still is, but is showing signs that he's not a complete douche, even though he is a douche, basically. But he has some positive signs, like the fact that he seems to be paying attention to his son. He actually shows some merciful judgments when sitting in council from his own initiative that Otto, the Hand, actually disagrees with. Some justified and some not. And so I like that they're showing more elements to his character, which was needed, because you don't just want a complete, write-off douchebag character that you hate. It becomes more nuanced when you see these other sides of him. And that's happening in the scene where they're going through logistics. And then, of course, the son is being rowdy and starts to get in the way. And he's from the Lannister house, I forget his name, but the Lannister guy is getting frustrated because the little boy is getting in the way. And there's an interesting dynamic where the king starts to abuse his authority a little bit, because he commands, the Lannister guy to entertain his son. In fact, to kneel down and be a horse for his son. And again, happening while the logistics. So now this is another third dynamic that's happening, which is the relationship between these two characters, because this could greatly insult the Lannister, but also the king is now throwing around his authority, ordering someone, a person in high authority, to do something ridiculous and make a fool of himself just for the king's pleasure, right? Otto talks him down, or his wife does, or his mother, which is the Queen Regent. And he doesn't have to be the horse, but it's another side to Aegon's character that we see here. And so that scene establishes additional characterization, additional relationships between characters, as well as the logistics of the battle. It's a very well-written scene, right then. All for the things that I'm explaining. That's why shows like House of the Dragon is just a breath of fresh air and a drought of sludge. And it's very enjoyable as a result. And there are more logistics at play about who is going to gain control over, is it Harrenhal? Kind of more the central region. And all of this is really important. One of the things that I thought was done so well in season 1 of House of the Dragons was how politically important state marriages were in alliances and gaining power and stuff, which I feel is oftentimes only given lip service to in so many other medieval inspired worlds, where it's like, you're betrothed, and you're not really told why, where all the betrothals make clear logical sense. And what we're seeing now in season 2 is that these alliances are coming into fruition, how important they are. Who is going to swear who is going to side with who in this coming war. And all the comments that are being made about the areas that they are trying to gain control over and how they will move in the future are crucial decisions that have weight behind them. Draws you in, makes it more immersive. We also see, as one of the next scenes, is the Queen and Cole are now in a romantic relationship, or they're just in a sexual relationship. Not too much romance has been shown between them, but Cole has shown unwavering loyalty to the Queen. And, it seems like that the Queen is only indulging in this now that Viserys, her husband, not Viserys? Sorry with the names. Some of the names can be confusing. But man, the former king, he was such a brilliant character, right? Now that he's passed away, that now she is single, you could say, and she's indulging herself. And so at first, you might get the impression that she is acting out, and it is inappropriate because, Cole has made a vow of chastity, even though he's already broken that. She's not married and stuff, and if it was to come out that she's doing that, it would reflect poorly on her, not as devastatingly as, when she was married or anything like that. And she has less power now anyway, but it is an interesting but also logical progression of their relationship. She says that this will be the last time, and yeah, that's not going to be the case. Sure, it's not either, not even in this episode. But she is clearly, indulging in certain things, and as part of kind of her moral compromises throughout the series, where she's always wanting to be the proper and respectful and doing the right thing, but willing to make those compromises as things progress. In actual fact, I think that scene might have been before the council scene, because the council scene opens with another note I have about, again, the politics, where they tell Aegon the king that the letters to the north and the Vale remain unanswered, and he responds saying the C word. But they already established that those are big ones, like the north, the Starks, and the Vale, which is siding, it seems like, with the Blacks, which is that's the big battle between the Blacks and the Greens. And I have two swords here. I want to do this in the intro of the review, but they're going to come up because I have a green sword here and I have a black sword here. And at the moment, I think I'm siding with the Greens, and so I'll be bearing this sword. But if things change, we will see. We will see. And it's an interesting dynamic as to which side you want, because both sides are pretty darn bad. But what happens in this episode does lead me more towards the Greens, because all right, I'll get that in chronologically, the end of the episode, and why that leans me more on the side of the Greens as we reach the gut kick scene, that I'll call it. One of the next scenes is the King in Council, and this is where he's showing some lenience, where one of the farmers mentions that he wasn't prepared for 10% of his livestock being taken by the crown as an additional tax to feed the dragons. Again, logistics and logic making sense for what's happening, because the dragons are being overtaxed, worked harder, and the king is hearing petitions. Now, Usually, like, this is an aside, this is just my medieval side coming out. Usually the king would not be hearing petitions of such lower classes. His lesser lords would kind of be handling, and the king would only hear petitions of the higher nobility. And there would be a duke or an earl within the king's landing jurisdiction or around the farmers that would be hearing the petitions of the actual farmers. But it's good for the story, okay? But don't let, it's funny because I say you shouldn't let yourself be educated of medieval culture through fantasy stories like House of the Dragons, yet House of the Dragons has more accurate medieval culture in it than Braveheart, like the film Braveheart, right? Which I find hilarious because it's actually showing a king in court hearing petitions, just the classes are a bit different. And so I will make small corrections like that because what's interesting is that a lot of people do get introduced to medieval culture through fantasy, Lord of the Rings, House of the Dragons, Game of Thrones, and make assumptions, whether we like it or not, about medieval culture and even medieval history. So, I'll just make comments like that if there's something to correct here and there. But it is cool that they show, petition kind of, vassal structure. And the king, is being really generous and kind, which at one side you'd think is out of character because you're expecting this, Aegon to be a complete douche. Yet at the same time, it's completely in line with how they've prepared, how they foreshadowed this, because they show Aegon asking his mother in season 1 if his mother even loves him. So he has been a dropkick, basically, layabout. And people have never liked him or regarded him with any respect, and he feels unloved as a result. It's his own fault, but he felt unloved. And when he was crowned, he saw this massive crowd adoring him, and he got drunk on it. And his character loves being loved and admired, even if he doesn't deserve it at all, because he is still a dropkick, right? But he loves being loved, and that is actually causing him to act in more kindness in court to his subjects because he wants to be loved. Yet he also wants to be feared and respected. And so parts of the episode have him kind of talking about what he should be called, because they introduce him as the magnanimous, and he's like, magnanimous? And then there's side conversations, of him what about the Dragonheart and other things like that. And but these are all great things in line with his character. So he's still a douche, he's still a dropkick, but he's acting kindly because he's actually a kind person, but he wants love from other people. He's still very selfish, of course, and it's a good scene overall. And it was at this point in the episode where it's kind of showing how different characters are reacting to this that I just made a note that I really like how this show, just House of the Dragons overall, showing no favoritism and no agenda. And you might think, there is, because the lead up to season 1, there was comments by the actors and everything about, there's messages about feminism and other things like that, when in reality, this show is showing women and men as flawed as each other, really, right? This war and battle is a result of as much the women as anyone else. And I like that is being honest about the human condition, because there's this false idea that sometimes gets perpetuated that if women ruled, there would be less wars or no wars. In fact, there was a line from the TV show The Nanny. Don't know how I remember that, but literally, where the nanny, Fran Drescher, says, and if women ruled, there would be no wars. No, when you look at history and the women rulers, there was just as many wars under their rule, if not slightly more. It's not a perfect sample skew because there have been less women rulers, and so not a wider sample size. But on average, it seems like women have gone to war for any number of reasons a few times more. But I think the statistics can be skewed. But in any way, I like that the show is just being honest about this. Okay, there's good people and bad people, men and women, regardless. And the show is being honest about that. I have to say that, I felt something when the brother returns to the Queen. This is the brother of Luke, who was killed. And so this is Jace, I believe, returning. Some names, right? And he tries to report on his duty before grieving, but is trying to hold back tears because, of course, the main thing that's going to be on his mind, he hasn't seen his mother yet, is that his brother was just killed. And mother, of course, just top quality acting, right? I did feel that emotion. It felt sincere, and they embrace in their grief. Small little things. Again, medieval accuracy. They show a door being opened and it has a counterweight helping the door open. Small little things. So, when the Queen returns, she says that she wants... I forget his name. I need to write some of their names down, I think, because it's the one with the eye patch, who killed Luke. And the Queen says that she wants him in revenge. Daemon is taking that a little further. Daemon is seeing that as a son for a son, by saying son instead of the name of the person she wants. Well, as we know, that meant any son might be on the chopping block. Oh, gosh. And that's what the assassins choose, ultimately. But Daemon's plan is perfectly in line with his character. Although Daemon is saying, yes, go after so-and-so, but he does mention son for a son. That's the reason they're going after him. And I find it interesting that the assassins were so willing to substitute which son. This I'm not sure on. This is why there are some questions. There are some questions about the execution of this episode in regards to this part. Because I would think that they wouldn't be so ready to murder someone else that they were not told to. Unless they were ordered to. If Daemon gave the order, any son. It didn't seem like that. It seemed like Daemon was pretty clear about, no, has to be, is it Aemon? The names, right? Has to be him. Even if Daemon didn't give the order, can you justify it that the assassins are like, they're so desperate to get paid that surely any son will suffice? And the fact that they find question marks on how they find the heir, the son of the king, in such a vulnerable position, that's a question mark, right? But they're now in a position where they have ability to murder him. Oh gosh, that's awful. The murder of an innocent child is a gut punch, man. So they have that choice, and it's like, all right, son for a son, the heir to the king's heir, that's good enough. So maybe I could see the assassins jumping to that assumption because they just want to be paid, and they think, yeah, we'll get paid anyway, it's just as severe, even if Daemon will be enraged that this happened. We're yet to see Daemon's reaction, if he'll be like, good enough, or he'll be like, you friggin' idiots, you just escalated this. I could see Daemon going either way. I think he'll be regretful, actually. I think he didn't want this to happen. I think Daemon has shown signs of morality, even though he's willing to hurt innocent people. It's usually when he's really angry and stuff like that. He has shown signs of ethics in the way he was loyal to his brother, showed respect, and honored his sovereignty and stuff. So I think Daemon, will be pretty peeved that this happened, but he probably will also not want to show any signs of weakness, that this is really his fault. So he might play it off as, it's good enough, what's done is done, message sent, we have to deal with it, so I'll take what I'm given, even though I'm still annoyed it happened, you idiots. That's kind of my prediction, how I expect Daemon to react. It'll be interesting to see episode 2 of season 2, to see if that is correct or not. The way he got the information, from, is it the White Worm, the lady that, was trying to escape King's Landing? And look, there was a blockade, so it makes sense that the forces, the blacks who were controlling the blockade, would have gotten them, would have been in a position to inspect the ships, find the lady, hand her into custody if they identified her, which seems like they did. And so that makes sense that Daemon, was in a position where he was able to speak to her and then find a use for her, which is her connections to get into the city. And he has his connection with the City Watch. He trained them. They see him as their commander still, and he knows the right one to approach. Makes perfect sense. That's all working really, really well. The rat catcher knows back ways into the castle, and the castle would have sally ports or posterns that would allow entrance. That's all perfectly logical. It was on historical castles. We're all making sense here. They've already shown that there are back underground entrances to the castle. So the rat catcher knows the way. and they're sneaking in, and so everything's going pretty good so far, right? The plan is making sense. Ballsy plan, unlikely to succeed, you know. The one they're trying to kill, he's a tough guy, good fighter, but they got this brute, large, strong guy. They're both heartless killers by the look of them. And they have, they're going in the, you know, lower areas, right? The Ratcatcher knows how to go that far, and they get to a point in the castle where they need to go into the higher rooms where the nobility lives, and the Ratcatcher doesn't know his way around there. He just knows his way in, and there's a bit of a confrontation. He demands they go further, and this is where it's just like, I can grant that they might get some free movement in the castle posing as servants, Ratcatchers, and it's the dead of night. That's when the Ratcatchers would be doing their work and things. What I have an issue with is, where are the King's Guard? The royalty are protected by the King's Guard. That is their oath. That is their sworn duty. And in most situations, for all the important people, a member of the King's Guard usually guards the door entrances to the rooms. In this scene, the King's Guard are nowhere to be seen. Where are they? Why? The fact that the Ratcatcher guy and everything can walk into, is it Eamon's room? The guy's room, uncontested, not contested. And look, I'm not saying the King's Guard wouldn't have let them in. It's like, yeah, you're a servant, do your duty, everything. Yeah? They show literally no one, because that's how they inadvertently stumble into the Queen's chambers where the two heirs are sleeping. There's no guard on that door at all, and that just doesn't make sense. That's not how they've shown things play out in the series so far, and this is, I guess, my biggest criticism about it. They've shown they have talented enough writers to logic a reason or a method for the assassins to get in where they need to go, behind the back of the King's Guard, distracting or something like that. They're just, instead, in this, the King's Guard are just nowhere to be seen. And so that's just like, you know, that's it drops a point or two, because that's a problem. And I criticize it. I criticize it, and I would have criticized it in any other show. I'll call it out here as well. That just doesn't make sense. And so they don't find who they're after, and then one of the assassin guys runs into a servant, and he thinks, oh no, she's seen me, I gotta deal with her. So he runs after her, and by running after her, he stumbles into the Queen's chambers, or a chamber, and stumbles back. But anyway, he stumbles back and finds the other assassin guy, which is the Ratcatcher, and is holding a knife to the actual, so not the Queen Regent, so not Alicent. This is the Queen married to Aegon, which is also his sister. Yeah, it's weird. Hey, Targaryens, they do that, right? And the Ratcatcher points out that, look, the two heirs are there. A son for a son. They're basically saying it's good enough. They ask which child is the boy, the son. I don't think that needed to be as big a mystery. They do mention they can just check the plumbing in more crude words, right? Maybe they're reluctant to do it because that would wake up the kids, and they don't want any noise, and if they strike while they're asleep, easier. And so but the fact that they would rely completely on the word of the mother is not so sure. Like, if it's so important that is a son to send the message that they think they were, you know, ordered to send, you'd think they would confirm it. And then, yeah, this is the gut punch, right? They, poor innocent, you know, young child, they murder him and chop off his head. They don't show it, thank freaking goodness. Couldn't handle that. But just the sound, it was, yeah, disturbing enough. There are some things that affect me emotionally more than other things, and yeah, violence against children is one of those things, especially, you know, when it's related to close members within a family and stuff, and the mother is there. She runs away before the deed is done, but, you know, she knows what's going on, and that is just all horrifying. It gets the emotion reaction, and for the story they're telling, I can all right, yeah, I understand that's where the story's going, and this is an act of, it's going to escalate things massively, but that was rough. And I'm not saying that as a criticism. I'm saying it as a very powerful thing that happened in this story that is going to escalate and move it forward. And yeah, it engages you. I'm engaged and feeling strong emotion as a result. And I want to see the aftermath, the fallout of what happens. And so that was a very powerful, and disturbing way to end the episode. And it was rough, yeah. Poor child getting not only murdered, decapitated. Oh, gosh. Oh, okay. So, yeah, the mum run. And this, again, so the mum, she runs out, right? Grabs her other child, is running away, and she runs into the Queen Regent's room, Alicent's room. Still no Kingsguard. And this one just bonked. This one also threw me a bit because she walks in on Alicent having sex with Cole, right? And they don't show anything. It's just her bare back. Wording not intended. It's just her. You see her back. Okay. And Alicent, this is in her mind a kind of like, illicit romance, right? She doesn't want anyone to know what's going on. So you would think she would have the door locked at the very least. Or a guard would be stopping people and making sure no one's there and everything, but the Queen just walks right in on them. And again, it's like, it doesn't ruin the show by any means. Just one of those illogical things when so much of the show is structured on logic. And I think it still would have been powerful. She got to the door and, it was locked, and then she starts banging on the door screaming. It could grab attention of other people, but not before Alicent might come to the door and she wouldn't be fully clothed. And she's like, "What's wrong, daughter?" And then the daughter pushes in, and Alicent could be reluctant because she's trying to hide something, and then she sees Cole trying to, dress himself quickly, which would have gotten the message that they were up to some intimate relations, let's just say. That could have answered, because the fact that she would want to keep that romance hidden and have the door unlocked, that anyone could just open up and barge in, again, doesn't make sense. And it's, the writing in the show is better than that. The people making the show are smarter than this to make silly oversights like that, because they show themselves being so attentive in so many other things. And let alone that the door should have been locked in that thing. It's such a small thing in the overall story, so it doesn't ruin anything by any means, and most people won't even notice, right? And so it's a very minor thing. But still, I think the Kingsguard, where the hell are the Kingsguard? Right? This is a pivotal, important plot point for the story to happen, that the poor child gets murdered, right? And they could have achieved that while playing out the events much more realistic and logically than just saying, how are they going to get it? We'll just remove the Kingsguard. They disappeared for whatever, right? I'd like that to be addressed in the next episode, because there should be hell to pay, right? The heir just got murdered in his own bed, the heir to the throne, and so if this happened, the thing that Alicent, the king, they should all be saying, where the friggin' hell was the Kingsguard? How did they get in? There should be executions for Cole. Oh boy. Because here's the thing, I have been saying, where is the Kingsguard? The only member of the Kingsguard that we saw during these events was Cole. But there's more than him on the Kingsguard. There should be other members guarding the other rooms, and Cole is only guarding the Queen Regent, so even if Cole wasn't doing the deed, right, he wouldn't have been guarding the other rooms. He would be guarding the Queen Regent's room, or is it his time off? If he was smart, he would only be doing those deeds maybe during the time off. But again, because if he's on guard, he's near the Queen already, and so maybe it would be more suspicious if he snuck into the Queen's chambers when he was supposed to be off duty. In any regard, all right, I don't see it particularly as Cole's absence, okay, being the reason why all the other rooms were unguarded. No, there's still the question mark of where are the other Kingsguard, okay? But the fact that a murder happened and he is the head of the Kingsguard, okay, so even though he might not have been tasked to guard the door, it all is going to fall back on Cole as to whose fault this is, this break-in security measure, right? And that's the question that needs to be raised. A very important plot question that if they're going to stay true to how solidly they are writing this show, the next logical thing that needs coming out is how the hell did that happen? And why weren't the King's Guard protecting the royal family? And now all those questions should be levied against Cole, which is going to bring in further good drama as to the illicit romance he is having with the Queen, because when they ask where he was, where was he indeed? We know, but they don't want that getting out. Still, it should have been other guards, but anyway, it's all going to come back on Cole. So I can see where that's going, and that's more conflict in the future. But overall, the emotional weight of the event, even if it wasn't executed perfectly, the emotional weight is, you feel that that's going to have serious repercussions in the story, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it's going. And that is kind of my overall views of House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 1. Still really like the episode. It was a gut punch at the end. I understand why they did it, and it worked well for it, and just makes me want to watch more. And so I would still give it a solid 7 or 8 out of 10. Even though it's not perfect, lots of things to praise in it. And now that I've gone through everything in this episode, I think I just want to share some final thoughts on kind of the morality, the ethics, the sides, because I want you want to side with the side that you think is good. I think by the end of this season, no side is going to be good. But in terms of tit-for-tat justice and stuff like that, they showed that the death of Luke was mostly an accident. It was provoked. Eye patch guy. I will look up his name, don't worry, I'll get better. Didn't intend to kill Luke. No, not Luke. It is Luke. Jason, Luke. I think. Didn't intend for it to happen. Both dragons, they lost control of their dragons, and the dragons and it was really well done scene. That one makes sense, right? And it seems like petitions were sent to the Queen to say, sorry, it was an accident. She says no, and then she says she wants, the head of the... And look, in terms of justice, right, he is responsible for Luke's death, and I can understand them demanding that, absolutely. Taking the life of an innocent person, even if it was an accident, Daemon set the things in motion, right, is, not justice at all. Even though it's so funny, the show does a good job in kind of making the choices or the things that play out not necessarily fully ascribable to the people that, when I say cause them, initiate the events that led to that outcome, okay? Because Eye Patch, he didn't intend to kill Luke. It was an accident, but he initiated. It was his choices that caused the final outcome, even though what he was doing was probably after some time. He wanted his eye, mainly. Because he was saying, justice must be served, something like that, in that final scene. And so Daemon probably did not intend for the young child to be murdered, but he did set in place the pieces to fall into that outcome. So at the moment, I probably side with the Green. Up at the end, the Greens did some real dodgy stuff to put Aegon on the throne. They're acting in what they think, and so it's so murky. And at the end, I don't think I'm going to be able to take sides. I think at the moment I would be on the Green side, but this is the thing. Ha! Whatever side you side with now, you're there for good, I guess. Like, imagine if you don't want to be in the world, but imagine you're in the world, right? And you only knew what you did, even if you knew what you did now, right? And you have to make a choice. Which side do you pledge allegiance to? And you can't avoid it because war's coming anyway. So you have to pledge to a side, right? You pledge to a side, and even if that side becomes worse later on, it's pretty hard to change sides. Some people have, okay. But at the moment, I think I would be on the Green side. It's messy, and it's real. I can't pick which side is in the right at this point, but that's actually the intention, I think, behind it, where this is just messy human choices You could see the characters making these choices very logically. That's what makes this story feel realistic. It draws you in. And it's a kind of like a exploration of the flawed human condition. I don't think there's going to be a happy end at this, or a uplifting message. Though that's the thing, because the thing that won me so much to season 1, there was an uplifting message in it. And that was Viserys, his story. Viserys the Peaceful, where he just wanted peace. He wanted his family to stop fighting, and for season 1 was his story, and I love his story, and just the sign of strength, and the role of the father to protect his family, even at the sacrifice of himself. There were some great themes in that I'm not sure we'll see in this season. So maybe I will like season 2 less, because when a story is just crappy people doing crappy things, I don't enjoy it. I can acknowledge the quality of writing, don't get me wrong, but I generally need something a little more noble for me to love something. But then again, this does have swords and castles, so we'll see. You're right, those are my thoughts on episode 1 of season 2. I appreciate everyone for joining me with it, and as always, stay on watch.